Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for stopping by today. Just wanted to say something real quick. Wanted to thank everybody who has been watching my videos thus far. I know everybody says this in their videos, like, click, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. But in all seriousness, starting a channel out like this is actually really hard. Something I've realized is the YouTube algorithms are very different from some of your other social platforms. I don't know what it is about this platform, if it's just more organic and maybe they don't mess with the algorithms like the other platforms do, because God knows Instagram especially is very frustrating for those of you who are on Instagram. I'm sure you're well aware of that too. It's like a roller coaster, ups and downs, getting followers, not getting followers, getting views, not getting views. Very frustrating. But anyways, YouTube is seems very different, and like I said, it seems, I don't know, in my opinion, more organic. But with that being said, it's definitely a very slow process, and so anytime you guys watch this video, if you just take the second to give it a quick thumbs up, even that I think would be helpful for the algorithms itself. Also, if you want to leave a comment, I would greatly appreciate it. If you want to ask me a question, I will get back to you. I'm not unfortunately, I'm not at that point where my account is so huge that I can't answer people's comments. And like I said, I will. I actually answer everybody's comments or questions on all of my social platforms as of right now. Maybe one day in the future that won't be feasible, but as of now I do. And so anyways, I do appreciate you guys watching, and I appreciate any likes and subscribe if you're not subscribed. That certainly will help me grow and keep doing this. My biggest fear is that I'm going to get frustrated with this being such a slow process and give up on it, and I don't want to do that for sure. So every little bit of support is greatly appreciated. So wanted to talk about today the behind the scenes I'm doing for this photograph here. This is the new Mezco King Conan. He turned out really nice. My only concern I really had was I was wondering about the armor. I didn't know. I kind of had this idea in my head that I was gonna not want to leave it on because it was gonna hinder articulation too much, and of course it does hinder articulation some. But I will say I was very surprised at how well he still articulates in that armor. It's actually quite soft, and man, I wish some of their older characters had softer armor like that, like the Gambit. I don't know if those of you who have it. I used to have it. I actually sold mine, but I couldn't deal with the fact that there was no articulation in the midsection of that character because his vest was just too hard. So I would love to see stuff like that revisited. But anyways, in regards to the Conan, yeah, his articulation is pretty good in that vest. So I was very pleased with it. It looks cool, and it's funny because one of my kids had said when I told them I had pre-ordered it, they were like, "Why do you need another Conan, Dad? That doesn't make any sense." And then since I've gotten it and he saw it on the shelf, he's like, "Wow, that looks totally different," which it does. I will say this though, I don't have the original Conan. I have the second version of the Conan. I still like that overall look better than this one. I mean, because it's very different. It's very ornate and he's got armor. The other one's just more, I don't know, raw and barbarian like. So I really do like that a lot. But I do love the fact that this new one has double jointed elbows. I think that's awesome. And so for this photograph, I wanted to start off something simple. I don't know. I feel like I have a tendency of doing this. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I feel like I have a tendency when I first get a character to start with a simple pose and shoot it from there and then kind of build up from there. I actually photographed it this past weekend, and I photographed two other scenes as well. And I feel like actually this was my least favorite, and the second one was my next favorite, and my third one was definitely my favorite of the three. Yeah, so this was just a very simple setup. I used my television screen. I found a photograph online because I wanted kind of I was thinking a mountainous, snowy type thing. So I found a photograph that I liked online of that exactly. Then I have a big rock that I took for him to stand on that I got out of my yard. I put some flour on the rock to give it that snowy look. put a few of my little fake foliage, give me something in the foreground. And it's just a simple pose that I put them in, a little bit of lighting, and that was basically all I did. I didn't use any atmosphere aerosol or any fog machine or anything like that. Oh, and then shout out to my buddy Chris CMAZ. Feel free to go check him out on Instagram. That's CMAZZ, just in case you're wondering how to spell that. He had suggested that I tell you guys my camera settings, which I think is a great idea. People do ask me that sometimes. I don't know why. I don't think to do that for some reason. I think part of the reason I never did that in the past was because I really was shooting on the same lens every time, which was my 85 millimeter, and I was always shooting at an f-stop of 4. But since I started using the probe lens, which by the way, this was not shot with the probe lens. But since I started shooting with the probe lens, you have to shoot a much higher aperture on that because the minimum aperture on that lens is an f13. So at a minimum, you have to adjust your lighting to match for that. Otherwise, your scene would be way too dark. So yeah, I feel like I've kind of always shot the same settings, and that's probably why I never really mentioned it. I felt like it would be really redundant. But anyways, I'm going to start trying to do that from here going forward. So anyways, with all that said, this photograph I did take, even though I just was talking about that, take this on my 85 millimeter lens. I shot with an ISO of 400. My shutter speed was 1/15 of a second, and my aperture on this was an f8. I used to kind of shy away from using the television as a background because honestly, it's kind of a pain to use because, okay, for those of you who haven't done it or maybe have done it, it can be tricky, right? Because you need to do a couple of things. You need to match your lighting of your scene so that it's the same as your background. And what I simply mean by that is color temperature wise, right? That background is going to be somewhere on the scale of, cool temperature, which is more like your blues, or your warm temperature, which is, your oranges, somewhere in between. So you need to try to match your lighting to that. Otherwise, it's not going to look right. If your scene doesn't match your background, it's not going to look natural. It's not going to look realistic. So in this one, honestly, I can't remember if it was more. I think this one's a little more deceiving because you do see the sun and there's a big streak of kind of orangish yellow that goes across the screen. But if I'm not mistaken, the overall color temperature of that photograph was actually on the cooler side. So just had to get those lights cooler to match so that it made sense. And then the other thing is your television screen or whatever monitor you're using is going to be pretty brightly lit. And so that's going to change the way you have to initially set up your shot as well. If you're shooting on a plain background, you start lighting things and you just expose for the scene. But you can't really do that when using the background. You have to expose for the background first, right? Meaning you go in your camera and adjust, let's just say the shutter speed, right? So that your background isn't too bright or too dark. And then when you do that, more than likely your scene is going to look too dark. So then you're going to have to adjust your lighting so that it kind of bumps the levels up to everything. And so it matches and makes sense. So anyways, while it might seem like a simple thing, and some people, I don't know how people really feel about it. Some people might have a negative outlook like, oh, it's cheating or whatever. You're just taking a picture and putting it on the background. It's actually more complex than I think a lot of people realize, and it's certainly more complex than just throwing up, a fake wall or something like that. And then the other thing I really like about using that is for me personally, I don't have a real big room to shoot in, so I can only naturally create so much depth in a scene, whereas using a screen like that can give you so much more depth. I guess it's not technically real depth, but the perception of depth. So that's why I like to use it a lot more, even when I am using props and stuff. Because if you just have like a wall, say a fake brick wall behind you or whatever, that obviously is going to affect the amount of depth you have in your photograph. And more depth just looks more realistic and more interesting. So it's always good to do stuff like that. I recommend, if you've never tried it, experiment with it. And like I said, you got to try and match the lighting with your scene. And sometimes you might even have some weird, crazy colors in your scene. I know I've had times before where I was using a background and it was illuminating a lot of like a purplish hue. So I had to get one of my colored RGB lights and kind of try to match that hue of purple or whatever it was and try and cast that onto my scene to help make it match. Oh, and another thing I want to say about using the backgrounds is one thing that I did learn eventually was, normally I would shoot my scenes on an aperture of a 4, but unless you have your character right up, unless you have your main character right up against the screen, it's going to look kind of blurry, and it doesn't, I don't know, you kind of lose the benefit of having that added depth. So I had to start shooting with a higher aperture, which, for example, on this one is why I shot at an 8.0, so that that background would be more noticeable. I don't know, I guess that wouldn't necessarily, I shouldn't say would look more realistic, because if you were taking a photo like that of somebody with a real background like that, obviously how in focus it would be would depend on your aperture. But I find for these photos, it kind of eliminates the whole purpose of using the background for extra depth, because you lose that depth because of too much blur. All right, let's jump on over to the behind the scenes.